Hello and welcome to our webinar, From Freedom to Empowerment in Student-Centered Learning. Down at the bottom corner, you'll see a link, a tiny URL to this slideshow presentation. In it, we've purposefully embedded lots of links and resources for you to extend your learning. And the purpose is so that we can talk and then you can pause as much as you want to explore the resources as we go.
Hi, I'm Alicia Backman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a high school literacy teacher in Vermont. Literacy coach, sorry.
My name is Emily Gilmore. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a high school history teacher, social studies teacher, and have been working with Alicia for the past 5 years or so. We're going to go ahead and hide our video so that you have full access to our slideshow without our faces blocking the important stuff.
We'd like to begin by acknowledging we are sharing this work with you while residing on the traditional unceded land of the Abenaki people. In Vermont, there are 4 recognized Abenaki tribes. We also want to note that acknowledgement is but a first step. As Dr. Debbie Reese notes in her blog, there are some ways to take action with your land acknowledgement by recommending a book, a podcast, or a blog by a Native author. We've included a link to Dr. Reese's website, a link to a podcast with Judy Dow discussing Hidden Roots by Joseph Bruchek, who is a Nulhegan Abenaki citizen. Additionally, if you are a Vermont educator, there is a link to the Vermont Coalition for Ethnic and Social Equity in Schools website. This is a statewide coalition led by a multicultural and multi-generational group that includes people of color from various racial and ethnic groups, anti-poverty advocates, disability rights advocates, and LGBTQIA advocates. This group worked to pass the Law Act 1, which was enacted on March 29, 2019. It addresses ethnic studies being taught in core curriculum, which for us is the world history class we will share about. I also want to apologize to the citizens of the Abenaki tribes for my mispronunciations in the original recording of this webinar. Thank you to those who called me in, and to Lena Longto, who is an Elnu Abenaki citizen, for sharing with me about how pronunciation is connected to dialect and regional influences. As I continue learning, it is important for me to understand the history of language and how power and privilege show up in my work with literacy. So these are the learning targets. As you can see, they are written in student or participant-friendly language. So these are the things that we are hoping that you will learn through our time together. The first is I'm aware of how different lenses and frameworks impact students' learning. I'm aware of why I'm aware of why being intentional and reflective when using backwards design builds clear opportunities for learning for all students. I'm aware of the tools I can use to reflect on how I am meeting the needs of all of my students. So we are very meta about our process. We're very intentional about how we frame our work. So in workshops and presentations that we've done previously and with the one that you are engaging in today, we always think about how to have a lesson within a lesson. So throughout this webinar, we will be sharing with you both how we created this work and also why we created this work.
The first thing that I do in my world history classes each day is we start with a do now. So we are going to engage our prior knowledge, get our bodies and minds ready for the learning ahead. And we want to do the same with you. So feel free to pause and reflect on the question, what does empowerment and freedom mean to you? To really make sure that you understand the work that we do and why we do it, we wanted to really hit these key ideas. While what I do in the classroom, the strategies that we use, and the collaboration Alicia and I have done are super important, these are the really big ideas that ground our work. We recognize we are sharing this information during a time that is unprecedented, and for most of you, outside of your normal teaching environment. We deeply empathize with you and have included both physical and digital teaching experiences and reflections throughout the webinar. The things we have included are important to us in daily decision-making and have become even more important now. Alicia and I have been collaborating for the past 5 years to apply and to refine student-centered learning with our 9th grade world history learners. Our original goal was to create a learning experience that is personalized and proficiency-based. It has been messy and exciting and wonderful and hard. Through the successes and failures, we have been learning the importance of embedding trauma-informed practices, culturally responsive pedagogy, and universal design for learning in order to best meet the needs of our learners. What began as a movement to provide our learners freedom of choice has evolved from the freedom to empowerment through skill development, specific feedback, self-reflection, and meaningful curriculum.
So when we were first asked to share some of our learning, our state had just gone into shelter in place, and we did not realize where we would be, what it would feel like, or what it would mean for the work that we do. During that time, we attended a webinar that was focused on priorities for distance learning, hosted by Alex Chevron-Benet, an educator in Vermont who focuses on trauma-informed education. In the webinar, Alex explained that the 4 priorities, predictability, flexibility, connection, and empowerment, of trauma-informed education not only apply to the world that we are in right now with teaching and learning, but are also anchors that should be used throughout education. We will link these priorities throughout the webinar, and we wanted to highlight a couple of the ways that we'll be doing that here. So in connection to predictability, you'll notice already probably on the slides that we have organized the slides to include links that are with underlined text that will bring you to a live resource. Some of the slides will have chapter guides on them that will let you know what is coming. This provides routines and consistency so that you can see what is happening. And this is something that we do with students in the classroom so that they can know what's happening now and know what is coming. Additionally, we're going to spend some time modeling and scaffolding the ideas and learning that we would like you to do and work with students and understanding how to approach any new task or skill that we're sharing. We find that hopefully both for you and for our students, it helps support executive function skills and that it is very essential in the work that we do. Additionally, we'll be adding and showing you how there's voice and choice in assignments by asking you to stop and pause and to reflect on your own learning and to make choices about what you need in any moment during our time. And we find that this supports authentic control that students have in their learning, and we are offering it both for you as participants, and it's something that we believe in greatly with students in the classroom. In connection to flexibility, please feel free to hit pause and explore resources or take a break. Remember to take care of yourself, and as always, remember that we're providing you with an opportunity here with different learning, and we hope that you'll take what's important for you and honor where you're at in the journey, as all of us are in different paths with learning. With connections, feel free to take notes or make connections to the work that you're already doing and ask questions about what you might want to do as you move forward with this work. And in connection to empowerment, as you are participating, as the question we asked earlier links to, begin to think about how shared decision-making and authentic choice will empower your students and how you as educators might do that. This webinar is an opportunity for us to share some of our ideas around these topics that we are passionate about. We want to note that we are continually learning and we aren't claiming to be experts, but rather that we want to share our learning with you. Throughout this webinar, we'll share our ideas and the ideas of others that have impacted us. We want to speak with you and say that please make sure that if you use or share any of the materials that you credit the source. Please note that although we may share how we use a particular framework or implement an idea, that these are based in the knowledge of others or on the knowledge of others. And we believe and we know that it is important to us that you credit them and any of the resources that are provided.
Universal Design for Learning has provided me an essential framework to inform my instructional and assessment practices on a daily basis. UDL ensures students have access to their learning while feeling supported and excited. One of my mentors told me my first day of student teaching, what's good for one student will be good for all. And UDL reinforces the how, the what, and the why of that concept. Please feel free to explore the CAS guidelines, which will go into much more detail about what UDL is if you are not familiar. We first and foremost, before we start going into culturally responsive teaching, want to recognize that we are both white women, and we acknowledge that that means there's limitations to our cultural and historical knowledge. What you will see in our presentation is just one snapshot in time of our learning journey, and we are continuing with our self-work and learning to expand our understanding of human experiences outside of our own. We recognize our biases may be present, and we welcome constructive feedback.
As two white women, we also want to highlight voices and perspectives of people who are much more experienced on the subject, including Gloria Ladson-Billings and Geneva Gay. The next few slides include a plethora of resources we have learned from, and hope you will take some time to learn from them as well if you're not yet familiar. And as we mentioned before, if you're sharing any of that information, please make sure to cite the sources that you're using.
Some of the key ideas in culturally responsive teaching central to our curricular decisions, as written by Ralabate and Nelson. The three ideas are to listen with the intent to learn, implement with the intent to include, and reflect with the intent to grow. As Alicia said, there's lots of resources here. We recommend starting with this video to learn from people who are much greater experts than Alicia and myself are at this moment. Here are lots of resources.
So Gloria Ladson-Billings said, if school is about preparing students for active citizenship, what better citizenship tool than the ability to critically analyze the society? So we'd like to have you pause here to take some time to reflect on what this means to you. And again, this is also a great time to pause to explore again the resources that we've used to guide our own thinking. And again, we want to recognize that there are many more resources out there for you that are available for you to explore.
As we mentioned earlier, proficiency-based learning is really what started the work with Alicia and myself. Our driving philosophy, which has been influenced by the DeFores at Solution Tree, have been asking ourselves, what do you want students to know? How will you know when they have learned it? And what will you do next? Proficiency, competency, or standards-based learning provides teachers and students with clear language and expectations. Not only does this make teaching easier, but proficiency-based learning is a step in the right direction to peel back unconscious bias that can creep into conventional grading systems. Proficiency-based learning centers student skills and knowledge and removes behavior, which can reinforce the dominant cultural norms that may not fit all students and their backgrounds. Learning becomes about feedback and growth rather than penalties and punishment.
So at this time, we wanted to review and kind of go over some of our foundations. We're going to share with you some terminology and vocabulary that we've been using, and we want to do this in order to have a shared understanding of what we're discussing. So as you are designing tasks and assessments, one place where we start is that we look at what it looks like if students are successful with the task or the skill. So we look for the success criteria. We use this as an anchor to designing any instruction or mini lessons if there are new skills or content that students will be engaging in. Additionally, we use previous formative and summative assessments to determine how spiraling back might help strengthen the skills students have already been working on and support them in the learning process, as well as help us see how to expand and enhance those skills in the future.
Linked, you will find a culminating summative assessment that we have used as with my current students, and we're also providing you a copy of that to follow along with. I will explore the specifics of the assessment in our next section, and we thought it would be helpful if you had the summative as a resource for you to have as you follow along. You will see one of the first things in the handout are those success criteria, including taking notes and using the information in their research projects. And we'll go into more detail in just a little bit.
So here we begin to talk about learning targets, and for us in the creation of the units that we've been doing with students in world history, we always start with looking at the proficiency and thinking about the skills connected to the proficiency, and then developing learning targets or goals that we want students to demonstrate proficiency in by the end of the unit or the end of the assessment. We use the success criteria as a guide so that we know that what this will look like. We also always make sure that the learning targets are in student-friendly language, and that when we consider our tasks, we consider tasks based on not just the task itself, but focusing on who are our learners, what is the content that we're connecting to, and what are the skills that we're directly focusing on in our instruction and assessment during that unit.
On this screen, you can see at the performance indicators and learning targets that are currently used in my department right now and are the ideas that have influenced the summative assessment that I'm using currently. The language in the learning targets were created using the C3 Social Studies Framework language in combination with the older Vermont Social Studies Framework performance indicators specific to our school. What is important to note is the difference between the teacher-centered and student-centered language of the performance indicators in the blue and the gray, and the learning targets.
With our work with learning targets, we also work to build learning scales. Learning scales are different than rubrics in the sense that learning scales are a continuum that articulate different levels of knowledge and skills relative to a specific standard or related standards, whereas a rubric might be something to check off the components of a particular task. So we feel that with learning scales, especially in our current situation, it is important to determine the most essential skills that we want students focusing on, and also to make sure that all of your learners can see themselves on that scale or on the scale that you've created. So this may be thinking about skills that students may need prior to engaging in the skill that you're focusing on with the instruction, practice, and assessment for the current unit. So for example, if you're asking students by the end of a particular unit to be able to develop claims, prior to being able to develop claims, there's skills that students need to get to development of claims. So they may need to know kind of what a particular topic is. And once they're familiar and know and can articulate that topic, they may then need to be able to say, well, what are the lenses, the perspectives, the views connected to that topic? And then once they have that, what are some of the details and main ideas that are focused on there? And once all of that is there, then students can begin the work of developing claims. And so we really, in the work that we've done, made sure that students can see this and can be continuing to work on these skills during our units. So at this point, we're going to have an opportunity to see how Emily has implemented this in her classroom.
So you have the world history handout. It's also down at the bottom of this slide. This is the culminating summative assessment for our ninth graders, for the ninth grade experience. A quick little background on the course as a whole. It is thematic and it starts with exploration of identity, culture, and pivotal events. We learn about world religions and belief systems, forms of government, roots of conflict, resolutions of conflict, and then the students have the opportunity to apply their skills in an independent research project for the final quarter. That also means that we are in the middle of that in a pandemic. So you will see where the foundations have been built that we have relied on during this time away from our physical buildings. And it's those skills that have made this work possible. Alicia and I have collaborated over these topics that you see here with note-taking. The students have been practicing note-taking since October, getting feedback on, learning different ways to take notes. They've been working on summarizing information, both in their note-taking strategies, but also in applying those summaries of the research and synthesizing information from multiple sources. The students have been building a sense of wonder. That really helps with the research process and also with doing anything at home because they're going to have that resiliency to keep going through the research process. Having that authentic wondering is really helpful to keep that alive. And then we have built up what student voice means and looks like in the classroom, as well as building students' capacity to to follow through with student choice and to be successful in choosing how they want to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding, as well as seek out information. So those are all linked presentations that Alicia and I have collaborated to create, and we'll also take you to slides that we are going to be talking about next. One of the most important things that I start class with every day with is 5 minutes of inquiry. In this, just 5 minutes at the start of every class, we watch the CBS Eye Opener. We review the topics that are in the news. We write them down so that students who didn't remember the topics can see those and research them, as well as know how to spell it. And then the students have 3 minutes to explore any topic of interest that came up for them. On the right, you can see an example of a student record of the different lessons and their 5 minutes of inquiry results. The students are asked each day to create their inquiry question. So what was something that stood out to them that they want to learn more? They're building that capacity to wonder, and in this process, hearing other students' questions. So they're building off their own knowledge and they're learning from their peers. And as a group, I'm able to give feedback as students are sharing. And we clarify research sources, we clarify what's happening and why we're hearing different perspectives. We're building that capacity for students to learn on their own. Next, we are building student voice. So with student voice, the students are constantly being asked to give feedback on the units, the instructional materials, note-taking resources. They are giving feedback that I am then implementing, and we're talking about how their voice is impacting the way that our curriculum is going, the direction that it's going. Here's an example of a form that students were asked to fill out just before we moved into distance learning. And it's really asking, based on the things that we have talked about both in the class and in the news with their 5 minutes of inquiry, what would they like to spend more time digging into? Based on the results, those pieces were used to directly inform what their summative assessment resources were. So it's authentic voice. The students really are helping to shape and create the curriculum and the resources that are provided to them, which was even more essential as we moved into distance learning, where immediate feedback is harder to get, and especially helping students one-on-one is a lot more difficult to accomplish. Through the summative assessments over the year, the students are building an understanding of what it means, that confidence in their learning to make decisions of what they want to learn and how they want to demonstrate what they know and understand. I provide a framework and a structure for the students to follow, and then they really have extra flexibility to shape what they want to do and how they want to do it. So this is an example of their first summative assessment. You can see that the 3 big ideas that we're focusing on are pivotal events, identity, and culture. And those are the big learning pieces, and they get to choose how they want to show what the skills that they've learned. So by having that flexibility and choosing something that's really personal, that they're an expert in already, we're taking out an extra layer, an extra barrier that could be in place. And they're building confidence by getting really positive feedback on making sure that they're choosing the best possible topics. And that's done through conferencing with students and really checking in with students to make sure that they feel good with the choices that they're making, because that confidence is often a barrier to getting started in a project. If you would like to learn more about feedback and the type of feedback that I have been using in the classroom, there is a link at the bottom of the slide that will take you to that slide that will be later on in our presentation. This is the Padlet that I have used to curate the materials and content for students to use as an inspiration board. You can see on the left-hand side, and actually if you click that image, you can explore the Padlet on your own as well. It's a super cool website if you've never used it. I use it a lot with my students to help them organize their notes. It's also great for resources. So on the left-hand side, you can see that that's the same information that is in the overview of their summative assessment. There's also a key, so they can look and see if they're looking for a map, they can look for the map icon. Next to every resource is an icon for the students so that they can help really narrow their focus. This is super helpful for students who don't feel confidence in their reading abilities. They can go for a podcast or a video, and for students that really love to read, there's those resources available for them as well. Finally, the platform that you use, it's super important to have that predictability, as Alicia pointed out, that Alex Chevron-Benet has emphasized as well. That having that predictability, having that structure that the students are familiar with is incredibly important so that students know where to get started, they know what the expectations are, and that consistency and follow through is also important. That previous exposure, it's really hard to use new platforms or ask them to use different websites that they've never seen before when you're not face-to-face. And so you can also see in this snippet that I use Screencastify to record videos going over the documents, to go over the resources that I'm providing, so that there's just one more way for students to access the materials.
In this next section, we're going to do a quick kind of overview of assessments, feedback, and scaffolding. So we've talked a little bit about formative assessments in the work that Emily is doing in the classroom. We want to also note that formative assessments are essential in how we know if a student is making progress towards the proficiency. For us, they are frequent and intentional so that both the students and us know where they are at on the continuum. In addition to providing formative assessments that we develop, we also ask students to reflect on their tasks and learning using the learning scales. So the students are seeing the learning scales and applying and looking at where they're at and where they're going next on the continuum as they grow. And so a student who might find themselves at one point developing in a particular skill is looking how to demonstrate proficiency, and someone who might have demonstrated proficiency already is looking to find ways to expand or enhance on that skill as well. So our focus is that all of our learners are growing on that continuum. So just quickly here, just to model a little bit of that kind of formative assessment piece, is there's a link that says joinpd.com, and there's a code there. It's this is using Pear Deck, which is a tool or an app that we have, that I have used with students. Here you're going to share your questions, connections, or any aha moments you're having during your learning right now. And some of those questions will help us to prepare for the online chat later this week.
So here are different tech tools and tasks that I use in the classroom that I found to be really effective to meeting the needs of students, especially using that UDL lens. It is important to remember that if your students aren't exposed to this, you want to make sure that you're finding a really accessible way to teach them how to use the tools. That is just the greatest barrier that a lot of students experience, is feeling overwhelmed with new technology. While technology is awesome and can provide really incredible access, it also can be inhibiting. So make sure that you are finding those ways to create how-to videos for your students. It's really important to have a blended learning approach if possible, both in the classroom and at home, and to create those continuous learning opportunities to create a more seamless experience. As we have talked about previously, feedback is a central pillar to providing students the information they need to grow. A strengths-based approach allows for more conversation between you and the student, as well as reinforces a positivity towards learning for the student. One of our favorite graphics we share and work with pre-service teachers is the feedback versus feed-forward article from the Cult of Pedagogy. And I just want to reinforce that it is super important to have those interactions with students so that they see the feedback and understand that you're coming from a really positive, growth-based place.
So as we're designing instruction and learning for students in the classroom, linking to the article there, How to Identify Barriers and Respond to Them, connected to UBL, we ask these 3 questions. So where might there be a barrier to students achieving the goal in this lesson? What is one tool, resource, or strategy I can include in my lesson to help reduce this barrier so that students can achieve the learning goal? And how can I make this strategy available to all students from the start of the lesson? As Emily mentioned earlier, what's good for one student is good for all of the students.
A great example of how easy this can be is on a Google Slide presentation, they have built-in captions, and all you have to do is click it, and now you can see that there is a really great and clear closed captioning option for students who may be hard of hearing, but also for all students who may just be losing attention and would like to have those extra prompts available. So just with any kind of teaching or planning, really, the expectations of how things will go generally do not perfectly align with the reality of it all. Now more than ever, this is true. We began planning this presentation and the summative together physically and quickly had to adjust and to adapt. The most important takeaway for us has been recognizing that things may not go as planned, and that's okay. The most that we can ask of ourselves is to learn from the process. I would say the best example of that so far has been that in the outline of the summative assessment, you will notice that there isn't any proficiency language. In really paring back what I was asking my students to do from a distance, I realized that full choice in how they were demonstrating their knowledge and understanding was what they needed, and that was the feedback that I was getting. The more that I asked of them, the more specifics and criteria and handouts and whatnot, the less I was getting from students. As soon as I started paring back and really asking them what they wanted to learn and how they wanted to show what they learned, the more invested the students were and the better the work the students were turning in. That's also because we built those foundations as a class and the students knew what the expectations were with those proficiencies, even if I wasn't explicitly listing that in their criteria on the handout for their summative. That's still the feedback that I'm giving them, but it's not how I am assessing them because that's just the reality of where we're at right now in this moment with my students.
So some noticings that we've had through this process, and we might, and maybe you'll connect with this as well, is that you sometimes might feel like the image that's on the left side of the screen, and there might be some bright moments where you feel like the image on the right side of the screen, sorry. And at any given moment in a day, you may fall anywhere in that continuum or on that continuum. We also want to acknowledge that some students are struggling with the current crisis learning situation during the pandemic, and that might be academically, it might be socially and emotionally, it might be both. We're also noticing that there are some students who are thriving outside of the traditional constructs of school and thinking about how we will continue to apply the practices of predictability, flexibility, connection, and empowerment as we move forward with the work that we're doing with students in the classroom. And we see that there are students who are benefiting from the self-pace of lessons, the opportunities to create and maintain their own schedules based on their needs, maybe being less overextended with commitments in and out of the classroom, and possibility for more opportunities for creativity in the way that they're thinking about learning. Additionally, during this time, there's more autonomy to empower families and students to make choices about learning. For example, in our blog post that's linked on the resource slide, Kelly Wickham Hurst notes that all kinds of families, diverse ones, who right now are offering their children lessons laden with care and love. They're guiding their children through learning that centers them in the narrative, making them the heroes and heroines, and teaching them their history and not just the old white Eurocentric one. The people who are grateful for this time with their kids to show them another way and not the status quo way that American schools struggle to change. So we want to continue for ourselves, Emily and I, thinking about how we are teaching for liberation more than just for knowledge. And we want to continue to center our learners as we move forward with this work.
It's important to really stop and think about what was happening in our synchronous classrooms. So as you can see in the image in the left, that's really reflective of what a classroom might be today, especially for my students who have their phones, even though they're not supposed to. It may look like from the front of the room that all the students are engaged and on task, but what were they really doing? You know, who are the students that were really succeeding? And as an asynchronous classroom, that may feel like you're not the teacher anymore and not knowing where to go with that information. Now more than ever is the time to let the non-essential elements of our teaching practices go. I can streamline our learning objectives, I can focus on feedback, and I can allow students the chance to practice the skills in the ways that are the most engaging for them. On top of it all, I'm struggling too, and the fewer complications, the greater success for all of us. Here are lots of resources that we have found really helpful in our own learning that we hope you have time to explore as well. So this is really just to bring it all together. The historical view of the work that Alicia and I have done together has really ebbed and flowed. You can see we started off with percents and we were trying to get away from that with proficiency-based learning. There's so much information here. We moved to a single point rubric. We moved to proficiency-based language with lots of criteria listed. We then moved to single point rubric with proficiency language and additional expectations, different points, different language. We have a more narrow proficiency-based assessment. It just keeps going. And we keep evolving and learning new things, and we are really grateful that you're taking the time to listen to our learning journey.
So we want to take a moment to thank you for sharing in the learning journey, as Emily just said. And on the next slide, there is a Google form as we said, we like to model and engage in the process that we do with our students, with participants in our workshops and presentations. So if you want to take a moment to share some pluses, things that you think went well, some deltas, things that you may suggest for us for changes, and any questions, especially if you're engaging in the online conversation later this week, that will help us to think about things that folks are wanting to talk about. So again, thank you.
Thank you so much.